everyone. There's a too many grace periods.
Grace free.
God, oh, Lord. Okay. Awesome. So Zaga's half and Bearcats are neg. Mm-hmm. Cool.
And the stream is live now too.
All right, buddy. Thank you so much. If we get everyone to stand at that pedestal, or probably be best just to speak from that area of the table. I wish the lighting was a little better in here, Joe, but unfortunately it seems to be a little dark.
I look better in dim light anyway, so.
Well,
Okay.
outstanding. The aura of good speaker points from your physical presence.
Exactly.
Oh, you got 3 people watching already.
Oh my gosh, first thing in the morning.
Yeah. Well, not for the East Coasters.
Oh, fair, right. Yeah, it's about lunchtime, a little bit before lunch.
11.
Those time zones for those East Coast tournaments.
Mm-hmm.
Brutal.
Mm-hmm. All gonna encounter that when they go to Spokane.
Yep.
All right, DJ. All right, Bulldogs.
Okay.
Doc sent and all of that. Good to go. Right on.
Should be some.
Just
As long as we do the email everything out, just in case you need to switch up a card in your speech, I'll give you a little bit of courtesy time at the end of your speech to square it up with your opponents real quick. Just trying to keep those docs on point. You probably also make sure I'm on the email chain.
Yep.
On one or two conditions trigger me evaluating evidence. 1, you specifically call for a card to be evaluated in your last 2 rebuttals, or 2, there's some type of yellow flag procedural issue that needs to be addressed regarding the integrity of the evidence. Other than that, I will leave the exhibits to the counselors.
All right.
When you're ready.
Is everyone not ready? Grab.
Is green okay? TJ?
Yeah, green's fine. As long as it's the only color on the... Yeah, that's fine.
That power bar should also work in the middle of the table, TJ.
Oh, yeah, no,
It gets
that's
too entangling over there.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Okay.
Okay, you're good.
All righty, buddy.
This resolution is overdetermined by its relationship to social colonial power structures which drive asymmetrical consumption. All comes back to coal, which comes back to carbon, which comes back to the sun. The industrial evolution was fueled by the material expression of solar production. The libidinal joy experienced from energy being released. Our affirmation that death of reproductions is emissions reductions based around the material and affective architectures and the social arrangements and their ability to be socially or otherwise used. In 16 coal was the lifeblood of the industrial revolution, funded by compensation for slavery. Coal dominated the scene of British politics, social relation in the atmosphere. The nationalized industry formed a body politic and condition for social reproduction of labor. On the organizations of relations, which was the product of compressed climate events. Its burning unleashes geologic compression of those events, calls the constellation of intense material expression that is solar repository, social bond, colonial force, mode of political subjectification, a form of biological reproduction. This lifeblood of social, industrial, and colonial relations is part of a scheme of histories that determine us in colonialism. What becomes important is how the materializations of geopowers negotiate within its inheritance, how energy resources describe and inscribe geopolitical possibilities of power that might be used to forge different alliances that challenge these social determinations of the Anthropocene as a process of geotrauma of atmospheres of oceans, extinctions. The Anthropocene needs to be thought not in terms of infinitude or natal moments, which are always about reproduction, but in terms of the material and affective architectures and the social arrangements of their possibility to be socially or otherwise. The politics of prohibitions of the Anthropocene require sensitivity to the mattering of specific sites of geosocial scenes of extraction, the production of endurance, of social forms across the human differences they require, and attentiveness to how ecological war machines of the Anthropocene sites where we might come to understand how war machines form the geo of Earth and the socio-geopolitical underground. There's a reason why people love to burn stuff. We are psychoanalytically indebted to fossil fuels. Affirmation of the fragmentary nature of meaning that surrounds the human solidarities creates new political avenues which challenge hegemonic constructions of fossil fuels as a necessity. Use of in 16. The condition in which these gifts are borrowed go in ways that have consequences for the apprehension of agency, the ability to burn stuff up at higher and higher levels, including the planet's possibly the only exceptional thing about humans. It's only the planet's predilection to burn as a precondition for life emergence that allows the flame to lick its way through social life. Its polypolitic comes from the flames that are interested in combustion. Then there's some kind of Promethean Anthropocene subject that stole fuel from the keepers of the cosmos. The subject is also rockbound, tied to Earth, and pushed deeper into the rock until they become one with it. If we can see that we do not yet have a language which to speak the inhuman or know not what it means to receive the solar gifts without recourse to mastery, it's only through the entering of the process of these loves and desires that sparks such a language that might be forced if we employ a mode of attention and it's not interpretation but attempts to follow the geography of the underground. This is to affirm an alternative that is uninterpretable, experiment to an alternative to interpretation, to affirm fragments that constitute the very possibility of a world not imagined in any relation to a reconstructed whole as a fragmentary gesture that writes of its own interruption. The fragment opens out and unworks the closure of Earth to inscribe itself on us as a demands of a certain requirement towards radical futurity instigated through this question is always already a process of becoming something else. It is political charge rather than the narratives of human reproduction, saying the terms of engagement. The sites of the Anthropocene inheritance might be found in the comedic possibilities of plants trying to think the Promethean gifts from the anthropocentric corporality, the development of language and recognition that registers disruption and challenge to the organic chauvinism that is life. Our relationship to current energy production is inextricably linked to our inheritance of the carboniferous blood of coal. The transition to oil and other energy productions is based around a fundamental relationship to expenditure that found its forming in coal production. Only through the affirmative affirmation of the death of reproduction can we produce in human solidarities through which the socio-sexual implications of emissions reductions can be articulated. This use of 16 coal can extend out into unexpected ways as refuting undergrounds to estimate explicit the material and social bonds across difference. The conditions are not given in an individuated utterance that would be some master that could be separated from the collective utterance, turning against the inheritance coal with a proper consideration of what was inheritance turns against the socialities that it enabled after the pits, the geosocial relations of fossil fuels run underground, hidden in pipelines, in shipping containers, and zoned in a zombie Anthropocene body politic and a fetishism of energy. The aesthetic political practice of inhuman solidarity around fossil fuels needs to promote deep in the unknown regions of barely visible affiliations and affectual architectures turn towards its inheritance and into the emergence of a language that seeks out radically non-local gestures of its solidarity. You have been loving what the topic reduces ever since you were born. The saturated with carboniferous desire, our drives are moving towards a singular referent of expenditure, changing consumption patterns, creating new market, producing renewable energies. These are just all kicking someone out of our room so that we can pleasure ourselves. Understanding the gratification that energy production produces for the neoliberal subject is part and parcel of our erotic relationship towards consumption. On traditional debates about emissions reductions always end up failing at the point of public engagement because they threaten the reproductive impulses which are the driving force behind emissions, whether you like it or not. Engagement with the construction of reproduction is a precondition for reducing emissions. Use 716. The initial question buried near the heart of the Anthropocene subjectivity is about the form of the living and dying and combustion extraction of fossil fuels that entail contingent materializations of power, resurrection of the carboniferous geological planet forces within the modes of late Holocene humanism, which places certain demands on humans to be reproductive through bodies waking up at the earth and graves the Anthropocene must follow, or way back through new genealogical accounts for this life, both as before and different to this undead life of carboniferous desire. Anthropocene, this Anthropocene is the re-earthing of the released sunlight, the carboniferous and the event of climate that it contains followed in the wake of the originatory material exchange between climate catastrophes. And so it gets questioned that speak to the true distribution of agency by political divisions of bodies. If the Anthropocene suggests an anticipatory condition for the future of humanity, this love of carboniferous desire of soul standing reserve is making zombies of us all. We can't stop, we won't stop, we love the carboniferous fuel of stock even as it sears the skies and blackens our long-growing sacrificial environmental and social services. Zone service, this desire, our corporeal affiliations are always towards this inhuman loving before our life even begins. We take up the prenatal body saturated with carboniferous desire and its pharmaceutical, nutritional, mobile comforts. Our cellular reproduction relies on eating fossil fuels, forms of being possessed without possession in the gluttony, solar energy that joins humans in inhuman sociality with plants. Every little bit of plastic from mountaintop removals has crafted our socialities. Life is a vast system of tapping solar energy and cosmic forces, thinking about how we live in and from bodies of the dead and their solar bloodline requires attention to how fossil fuels intensify and multiply life, which makes particular petrochemical life. Normative fossil fuels make ourselves as forgotten subjects opened up by the intensification of those solar fuels and conditions of our possibilities for forms of reproduction that they concentrate. Welcome to the banality of fuel. As the trust fund children of carbon, our psychic demand of this bodily consumption finds its form in late carbon liberalism's attempt to constantly center the locus of meaning in the subject through a political framing of crisis that's always in the future and forever. Self-contained, they drive to find more oil. The phenomenon of coal rolling as a protest and even the insistence of natural gas as a clean fuel. These point to the inherent contradiction in our political ability to resolve these problems and necessitates a rethinking the forms of ecological violence that constantly reproduce themselves in libidinal and unseen ways. We don't know why we expend. We're just following our libido's orders. Hula in 15. A universalized waste expelling human cellular appears as the ultimate atmospheric parasite in the neoliberal climate discourse. Everyday's activities, carbon-dependent industrial living, connect one's bodily consumption to the waste and stranger intimacies of a shared atmosphere. The effects waste may kill softly and messy in a deep time if circuitous space of slow violence, largely unintentional ecocide parasite suggests that this is a human defined by waste and having late carbon liberalism produces myths, icons, feelings to recognize life as ambiguously queer is to divest from the spectacular temporalities of crisis that infuse environmentalism, queering versions by tracing the affective materiality that interrupts an anthropocentric body logic rather than a sovereign stance negation in relation to the law of compulsory reproduction, queer and humanism. Yet be seen as an account of interspecies entanglement and reproductive displacement that requires an askance of the human and thinking, death, animality, vulnerability in an age of extinction. Lateral reproduction suggests not some space of queer negation, but a problem of thinking or causal reproduction in forms of ecological violence that kill quietly outside the spectacular time of crisis. This is the death of reproduction. Our obsession with the coming catastrophe frames ecological context as asexual because they are the coup de grace that shows the end of heteronormative futurism has finally come, constantly trying to close the gap of our understanding of the changing climate. We compress geological time into quantifiable increments, tipping points and normative solutions, but the intimate relationship to the inhuman subject that we are always attempting to solve is forever disavowed and forever deferred. This is U716. Population is a genealogical concept framing survival, adaptation, and resilience, returns us to the racist practices of limits and aggregation of targeted populations in terms of operational responses. Question about geological subjectivity and the animate account of the sexual versus social reproduction of the Anthropocene is rendered a sexual and normative ends framing a geological life through the moments of natality, extinction, reproduction ends are never just amenity. If non-fatal ends can have violence and bodily purchase, they make conditions for survival possible. There's a need to examine modes of bodily affiliations with fossil fuels in conjunction with an awareness of the incommensurability of these solar gifts and how they introduce other forms of reproduction of carbon, necropolitics, non-species life, subtends the very possibility of human life, even species life rails against that dependence on the concern of affinity to the Anthropocene is locating anxiety over heterosexual reproduction, conflation of life. It's coupled with the tendency to accelerate and compress geological time into human life discourses while disavowing the agency of geological materials that presuppose that that life. This is to resist the way in which life provides an alibi for the immediacy of political judgment in ways that keep environmental questions separate from the intimate sphere, moving away from the intimacy predicated on individual life to sociology of blood that enable does not configure along kin relations, increase the sphere of political influence in the geological materialism while exercising that which constitutes the political sphere is not political enough. The scene is set to debate our impending catastrophe within the discursive space. Climate change becomes an object with prescriptive solutions that just move the deck chairs on the Titanic. All this is set against a backdrop of a continued attempt of human legacy to project a called existence which is intimately tied to the socio-sexual reproduction of the nation state to speak the language of technocratic solutions that the topic demands. Papers of the fundamental relations that structure our micropolitical assumptions around the presumed objectivity and pragmatism and violently excludes alternate perspectives to debate the resolution without interrogating its libidinal implications is to never debate at all. Use in 16. The forms of multiple reproductive life that constitute the Anthropocene that make him become imagined within a single emergent locket of population brought the conceptual object of the so that solution take the form of intervention at the point of reproduction of the imagination of climate catastrophes, of climate racism, outsourcing emissions, and offloading or letting die of migrants. These provinces carry with them different biopolitical consequences. Emissions from coal power plants are linked to premature deaths in India. Fracking in the United States adversely affects non-white communities, which is to acknowledge that fossil fuels are a necropolitical institution that distributes effects and even empowers the given the framing in terms of extinctual moments. There is a need to situate the Anthropocene in terms of inheritance that work against these biopolitical reproductions, appeal to future generations, and various legacy projects where tied to forms of socio-sexual reproduction. The nation state secure the conditions for the securitization of borders and the topology of choosing which bodies fall inside and outside of reproduction.
Cross-examination?
Yeah, alright. What does it mean to be a zombie?
We would say that the zombification, I guess, of the subject occurs when the subject becomes merely reduced to carboniferous desire, and then that desire determines how we relate to things.
So
like
what is a zombie?
Sociality. It's
we say it's a thing defined by liberal society as a structure, but we say that that structure is always one which is inevitably reductive.
So should we not be zombies?
We don't take a stance on non-being or being as a concept. Our argument is that there's a constant state of becoming that we engage in, that questions of identity categories such as that reify a humanist notion.
IBM has poisoned the water in Binghamton and people in those communities have to drink it. What do you do about the poisoned water?
We would say that the way in which things like poisoning of water occurs is by the kind of carboniferous necroeconomy.
Yeah, but we know how it occurs, but what do you do?
The energy, the reproduction of technology.
Now that it has occurred, what do you do?
We disavow the foundational structure by which it comes to reproduce
itself. So does that make the water
affirming
clean?
the death of reproduction
Does that make the water
the
clean?
Ability for that system to reproduce itself.
Does that make the water clean?
So you're saying after the 1AC, no more plants are going to be built up that poison water? Like that's just not going to happen anymore?
No.
Our argument is that the underlying grids of intelligibility that structure desire.
Okay, so how can you
where
explain
and
the
how those
underlying
plants are-
grids of intelligibility to people in Flint, Michigan who are drinking brown water?
Because those grids, one, it's not like it's their fault that they're drinking that water, right?
Yeah,
it
I
was
know, but
created
what do
by
you
a
do-
necropolitical structure.
We know whose fault it is.
That is
What do you
created by
do to change that?
Social assemblages, and those
Let's assume that we already know what the app is talking about. What do we do about those physical conditions?
Well, what the app is talking about is what we do, affirming the death of reproduction within that
All right,
system.
so
affirms the death
if
of
I
that
affirm
system
the
to
death of
reproduce it.
reproduction,
So we
do I
already
have less nuclear waste in my water?
I think that's a reductive portrayal of what the 1AC is trying
If
to
it's
get
a
at.
reductive, but we're not talking about what the 1AC is trying to get at. We're talking about what the 1AC does for
this is
people of
1AC
color and disabled people.
Cross-sec. So our argument is that the way in which those forms of life are capable of being deemed as lesser is because of the way in which
No, it's not about the life.
structures normative.
All right, so
can I
let's
answer your question?
No. You're not answering the question. That's why I'm trying to re-articulate the question. So let's assume that regardless of whether or not those lives are valuable, they're still dying. What do we do about that?
I know they're dying because of the way in which reproduction is structured. We've said that affirming the death of reproduction affirms the death of the systems that make those bodies being
I get that you're not going to answer a question. I have another question.
I'm trying to answer your question. You just don't like the answer.
My next question is, why is asexuality bad? Why is the environment being seen as asexual bad?
It's not.
That's
not.
literally
We affirm the death of reproduction.
Yeah, it's
of being
folks.
Cool. All right, I'll send me one. It's gonna be one off in case.
Bulldogs, please confirm that you have the document before we begin.
You don't mind if I use this thing?
Oh yeah, of course.
Alright, TJ.
You're way too tall for me.
Actually, got some water. Yep. Is yours?
No,
Sunflower kernels.
I think that might be Joe's.
Aha, Dr. Joe's. It's one of those secrets. Good, long, healthy life right there.
Oh, yeah.
Whole bag of sunflower kernels. All right, TJ, you ready?
Yep.
One off. Are you ready, Bearcats?
Right, it's one off in case.
Aha, one off in case. Thank you, TJ. I would have missed that. Just would have taken a flow of semi-conscious notes. One piece of paper. All right.
Disabled bodies are disproportionately impacted by disasters brought about by climate change. They are left behind, discriminated against in the face of resource scarcity. Disabled bodies are constantly devalued and sacrificed, which means even the wealthy they'll be abandoned when convenient. GPDD09 frequently cited concern was the heightened vulnerability of people with disabilities in disaster, emergency, and conflict situations. At the onset of disaster, emergency, or conflict situations, people with disabilities are most likely to be left behind or abandoned. During evacuation, people with disabilities were left behind in the rush to escape tides and winds when cyclone hit Myanmar in 2008. The disruption, social, economic, environmental networks, and support system disproportionately affected people with disabilities. As one participant summarized, whenever there's a scarcity of resources, those who are historically excluded from society, especially likely to experience barriers and access issues. When resources are diminished, stigma remains one of the most intractable barriers towards the inclusion of disability issues in disaster response. And black urban communities suffer from unique environmental conditions caused by climate gentrification that makes it so that even the air is structured with inequality. Fernandez 06. So, the South Bronx, home to some of the highest asthma hospitalization rates for children in the city. Studies have linked pollution to respiratory problems, decreased lung function, non-fatal heart attacks, and aggregate asthma lead to 15,000 premature deaths a year nationwide. The borough's high rates stem from a high concentration of traffic in a densely populated area, poorly maintained housing in impoverished neighborhoods, lack of access to medical care, and large population of black Hispanics with high rates of asthma. We think it's the same air, but it's really not the same air, Dr. Sterling said. And in disaster crisis, black and disabled bodies are constantly constructed through poor, miserable existence that are seen as foreign and non-American. This shows how these bodies will always be sacrificed in situations of disaster because they are otherized in the first place. Hervel's 11. Post-Katrina, two discourses, though significant, struggle for recognition only to be recognized merely as subtext before being similarly ignored. In any critical analysis, these two discourses were associated with the construct of third world and disability. Concept of both third world and disability are already overdetermined by ideological social discourse that constitute both constructs as natural conditions that defy any further explanation. Of the two, the construct of the third world enjoys a dubious hypervisibility in mainstream media coverage of Katrina. For example, the much fabled image of the outraged and horrified Anderson Cooper walking through the rubble. It feels like Sri Lanka, Sarajevo, somewhere else, not here, not home, not America, for whom the construct of the third world serves merely as a metaphor for the unnatural state of utter destitution witnessed in nations overpopulated by people of color whose natural conditions of despair and destitution and dirt cause them to live out their lives in perpetual crisis, and adopting an unreal view of power based on philosophical abstraction turns their attempts to engage politics because minorities need to have political analysis that relates to material conditions they face. They make debate less relevant for people of color and lead to creating a framework that excludes people of color and prevents revolutionary analysis, decreases participation, which is critical to resolving climate change. Hooks and 90. The contemporary discourse declaring breakthroughs that allow recognition of otherness still directs its critical voice primarily to a specialized audience. If radical postmodernist thinking is to have a transformative impact, then a critical break with the notion of authority as mastery over must not simply be a rhetorical device. It must be reflected in habits of being, including styles of writing, as well as it shows in subject matter. In the absence of any sustained research in what arts, scholars, or others outside the mainstream might be up to, such discussions become rootless instead of radical without adequate concrete knowledge and contact with the non-white other. White theorists may move in the discursive theoretical directions that are threatening to and potentially disruptive of that critical practice that would support radical liberation struggle. And the debate space, and particularly this legal topic, is key for developing effective communal strategies to challenge the issue of environmental injustice and white privilege. The 1AC is the act of turning away from that potential. Spencer and 08. To fight against the oppression of environmental racism at the outset involves a self-examination of the legal academy. That the classroom might create an environment for exploring white privilege if it is diverse and if it can overcome the patriarchal hierarchical model after which it is fashioned. The law has its own privileging problems to address when we apply legal standards of equal treatment to a social economic culture that systematically privileges some and disadvantages others. The result is the maintenance of an uneven and unequal status quo. The legal profession must turn outward to affect change. Professionals should work collaboratively with community activists and marginalized low-income communities of color experiencing environmental racism. These communities possess few decision-making alternatives to affect changes in policies and guidelines. We might view this as a relationship in which professionals ally themselves with the victims of oppression, recognizing the agency of all parties and their own complicity in maintaining structural oppression, and their focus on pedagogy and radical revolution actually leaves us to die. We are simultaneously hurt by the system and are dependent on it. Their refusal to engage with the structure is ultimately a criminalization of those who need it to survive, and its destruction is our death sentence. Break in 14. If I don't take my medications, I die. It's that basic for me. No, there's no alternative to what I take, no magic or anything else that may have well worked for you. And I have a problem with the fact that I have to rely on the state, which I despise with literally every fiber of my being, for basic sustenance, including these medications. If the destruction of the state that I dream of actually happened, people like me will die off quicker than some others. I'm actually not okay with being left behind because of my body, not okay with any of us being left behind because of our bodies and the circumstance in which we find ourselves, not in some future state-free oppression-free existence, and not now. The one thing we have any control over is now, so don't leave us out. Build a culture where various disabled folks are not left behind. This is basic as death, like literally, and their criticism of the state is ultimately locked within a politics of realism that assumes that there are irredeemable the manufacturer's crisis as a way of forcing the demos to accept their exploitation. Genuine politics is not a politics of reality, but politics of the real that contests the very system that refuses the closure of reality, that orientates its practice with respect to the contingent appearance of the inapparent, gives birth to new possibilities with no place within the rating system of possibility. With civil rights, the reality was that there was no place for African Americans as equal citizens. The civil rights movement founded itself not on political realism, but a politics of the real. The appeal herein of the impossible. When Rosa Parks refuses to go on the back of the bus, the inequality beneath the reality is revealed. Challenging the closure of this order, the contingency of the natural order is disclosed, revealing the possibility of a different order. The reality order becomes a regulatory mechanism to forestall any eruption of the real with the social order. In defending political realism, one really defends all of our claims to act on the behalf of everyone. Politics is what takes place outside government politics is what contests the system accounting, revealing its anarchic nature belonging to the order of reality that defaces and erases the real. The alternative is we should engage in deliberation over pragmatic action to improve the lives of marginalized populations. Now on to case. Their argument that the focus on the body is bad erases people's actual experiences and destroy the lived realities of disability and blackness. The body is key to how we actualize, experience, and understand the world, which means their theory couldn't possibly exist without their bodies, and their authors' bodies change their experience. You should prefer an embodied politics that will allow us to understand how our bodies and who we are affects the world around us, i.e. when they establish a normalized understanding of the environment and demonizes asexuality. As Siebers in 13. Embodiment is central to the field of disability studies. The young deaf woman who tried to pass for hearing will only succeed if she possesses significant knowledge about the cultural activities that define hearing in society. The social model oppresses opposed the medical model and require intervention to the level of social justice. The social model leaves out complex embodiment. Complex embodiment raises awareness of the effects of disabling environments, but emphasizes as well some factors affecting disability such as chronic pain, secondary health effects, aging, and derived from the body. These disabilities belong to a spectrum of human variation. Complex embodiment views the body not as unidirectional as the social model or non-existent in the medical model, but as reciprocal. Social representations obviously affect the experience of the body, but the body possesses the ability to determine one's social representation as well. People of color, women, the poor, people with different sexual orientation and disability confront the intolerant society on a daily basis. Not for a daily basis. I didn't read the David part.
Okay, Cross.
All right. I guess, why does the 1AC refuse an embodied politics?
I think what we're saying is a lot of your literature is on the idea that, like, the human body, the anthropocentric body, is like a myth and isn't actually real, or it's like the zombie body. Our argument is that's not actually how we experience the world, i.e. whether or not I have 2 legs, whether or not I have all 4 of my limbs, affects the way that I engage in society. So your view of the body and the way that we can abstract ourselves from who we are is wrong.
Okay, and is that abstraction based upon like the theory that we've posited in the 1AC, or is it like a performative link?
I think it's the theory of the 1AC.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the Fernandez and GPDD evidence. How does the AF, I guess, perpetuate a system in which disabled bodies and black bodies are left in the wake of environmental crises?
Because our argument is that you ignore the material conditions that make it so that this, like, climate change, this death drive is never neutral, i.e. certain bodies will always be affected by the impacts that you're talking about. And also I think our Fernandez card is a good argument about how, like, this kind of love for coal argument is problematic in the face of the people who are constantly getting asthma and dying.
So it, I guess, is the process by which carbon is introduced into the body both for sustenance but also in a way where one's dependent on it and it results in a kind of, I guess, dyadic relationship, not a material relationship in your eyes?
We say no. We say because it never gets to the question of how do we help the disabled people that were left behind in Myanmar? How do we help the people who are left behind in Katrina? It's these questions of maybe, like, you can win that you theoretically have, like, some idea of why it's bad, but you offer no material solution. That's our Bell Hooks card.
What material solution is the alt posit to
yeah. Sure.
It's not theoretical.
Sure. Our job, what we are saying is that we need to have material conditions, i.e. we could do things like a carbon tax, we could do things like build levees. We're saying that it's not our job to posit this. We're saying that
why not? You seem to have indicated that
we've already given
we're saying we should have the debate. I'm giving you the debate, but I'm saying that you can't win. We're saying that this conversation is good.
Why does things like building levees or a carbon tax prevent bodies from being
No. We're saying that people are suffering from climate change. Carbon tax will probably help us to move out of these communities that have been destroyed, or to rebuild these communities that are
solve the two harms.
What do you mean? How does it solve if the communities are destroyed and we rebuild the communities? I think that solves the harms of the communities being destroyed. I think the carbon tax actually results in the rebuilding of the communities.
In Myanmar and other
international
yes.
That's exactly what we're saying.
And also, it's our Brian card that says we can change social understanding.
know. No, I know. I better put it all down. Stop now. 6:37 left.
How much time left, Bulldog?
6:37.
Alrighty. And make sure you have the documents.
It's around 6, right? The order is going to be case and then decade.
Right.
Is everyone ready? Okay. There seekers evidence as a link to us. We affirm asexuality as a concept about the environment. We refuse the reproductive idea of a human subject making itself known is the problem. Our argument is that if everything, our argument is that the subjects are a process of knowing the process of knowing objects in the context of a symbolic renunciation. I.e., what the alternative is one which allows for liberal demarcations to occur. Our argument is instead that not that we don't see the resolution as bad in any sense. You're not the large-scale denunciation of governmental action. Our argument is instead we need to deal with the material forms which have created our relationships to this topic in the first place. It is what our affirmative is we still affirm the resolution and the logical outcomes. Our argument is instead that we need to understand that there are social functions which implicate our relationships to them. Their receivers' evidence and their argument that everything is a lived experience, that we cannot divorce ourselves from that. We read that as a structure over the ability to attempt to make that known is what allows make that known through a desire for the reproductive action is what allows for us to demarcate certain bodies as destructive and certain bodies as reproductive. Our argument is instead to deal with the material instantiations of how that operates, i.e. through coal as the social function. Our use of evidence points to a couple examples. The way to see the coal disproportionately affects minority communities. The way that it causes death in places like Bangladesh is an example to see that coal is not simply a fossil fuel. It is not simply an object that we use to burn, but instead a social function. It is something that we use for specific purposes, specific actions. You should frame all of their arguments that they make. You frame all of the arguments that they make as merely symbolic, whereas our material. We are actual discussions of the material structures and how we are implicated in them, because theirs are far more symbolic than we ever could be. Okay. First, we are analysis of material structures. That was above. Second is permutation. Do the affirmative as an instantiation. Permutation. Do the affirmative as an instantiation of pragmatic solutions. The question of how to help. The question of how to help these people is entered by use of evidence. Says that it has to be understood through the social aspect, which means that the permutation would be able to solve our Ahuja evidence. Says that the practices we engage in are always modulated by a liberal notion of the self. By a liberal notion of the self, which makes it so that we don't question our relationship or placement in specific structures, which is what their evidence is about. Their own piece of Hooke's evidence is about the ability or need for material analysis that it destroys things like participation and action. Our argument is that there is only way for us to increase the structural understandings of interpretation is by analyzing the material conditions we engage in. Their arguments about how disabled and racialized bodies are devalued and abandoned is exactly the logic of liberal notions that we are criticizing. Our argument is not a flight from the system. It is instead one that critiques the system from inside it, i.e. the affirmation of this thing. Our framework interpretation usually is we affirm the material structures of the topic, that we have to understand our relationship and implication, i.e. the bodily implications that we have in those structures. But the body that we have is intimately located within the idea of the rest of the world, i.e. the notion of ourselves as disconnected from our environments is something which allows for us to demarcate the self as a not I structure, which is which is something that the alternative engages in, but the affirmative allows for us to offer a way out, which is the permutation would be able to solve this argument that they need state structures. We do not say that the refutation of the state structures are necessarily bad, but instead the prerequisite to debating those assumptions is the affirmative change permutation. Do the affirmative before the alternative. It's justified by the fact that our evidence is specific to the fact that governmental policy or action is something that is the action that never really fails, because it always locates itself at the point of reproduction, at the point of reproducing a liberal self. But instead the affirmative is one that allows for us to reconceptualize what that actually means and how the self comes to it. Our argument is that there are identity categories. Identity categorization is always made as a specific structure. Obviously we can't divorce ourselves from body. I can't divorce myself from the fact that I was born blind, but that's not a structure that's a structure that is overdetermined by specific ideas or identities. Our argument is that there are specific notions we rely on, specific things that we need. State structures still exist, yes, but there are implications for how we relate specifically to fossil fuels that they don't speak on. They don't have a piece of evidence that says the focus on the way that fossil fuels are implicated in social structures is a bad one. And it's instead both their pieces of evidence are simply about the necessity of the way that specific emergencies or problematic structures specifically leave disabled bodies behind. Their pragmatic solutions are far more symbolic than ours. The examples that they give in cross-sects of carbon tax or the other thing are just examples. They are merely symbolic. They are not an actual example. They are just this statement without an example of how to create a radical possibility. Extend our piece of use of evidence is that we need to affirm the fragmentary nature of meaning, that there are things we cannot know about the world, but instead our argument is not that we should move away from them and not know them. We should affirm them and say that we cannot know them because the need to know that it's a dangerous structure. We should not overcode people with this. We should not overcode people with disabilities in the same way that people constantly say to me, "How can you see that?" or "How couldn't you see that?" That's an idea of overcoding that our argument says is intimately linked to an idea of reproduction. How can we reproduce ideas in the body of specific notions of fossil fuels? Our argument is instead that the material relationships we have to that is far more important. They say that we need to have this. They say we need to have the system. We don't destroy it. We don't refute it. Instead, permutation. You should affirm the resolution through our material advocacy without pretending that normative solutions will somehow occur as the result of our speech act. Instead, that the actions that the affirmative engages in is one that is a necessary precondition to engaging in those structures. Colbert 14. Only in submitting to the laws of action do I become an being or subject to all the be. Either I become subject by demanding inclusion in the state, or I refuse recognition. One recognizes the values of subjected qualities in no way with the very concept of political. I refuse normativity, refuse the notion of the constitutive domain or matrix that grants me the subject my subject being. And this is what becoming a perceptible demands. Counter ethics would be possible rather than ethos of my own habits and practices, or the political decisions are examined from the point of view of a the problem. The concept of becoming a perceptible enables problems that are adequate 21st century horizons. We really be asking about normativity in the year of climate change. This very self-further threatens life. Now is the time not to ask how we decide to maintain who we are, but whether there are questions, powers, problems that are not of our own choosing, that affect us not as doers but as barely adequate witnesses, which is exactly our argument, that we can be an affirmation of a material structure without necessarily affirming a specific policy, because those policies are always an inevitable example of how we engage in symbolic discussions. We instead say that the material recognition that we have is far more important. Their Bryant evidence is about as a critique of incremental environmental politics, using the language of their Bryant evidence. We are the environmental gadfly. We are just like that, to use we are the environmental gadfly, which is what the article is talking about. We need to engage. We need to be constantly criticizing those structures to make them annoying. We need to be like Socrates, i.e. someone that you don't have to talk to in the poll. It's our argument is that the affirmative is instead of a radical instantiation of how we should challenge those norms and structures. The last piece of USOF evidence that we read in the 1AC is specific to the way that when we constantly are framing solutions in a symbolic order, it makes it in a symbolic relation, i.e. just saying denunciations of what's going on, or saying denunciations of what's going on, or just using examples of ways that we could possibly fix something to papers over the social relations we have to make some homogenizing distinction around the world. The homogenizing distinction around the world. The alternative, additionally, would not be able to solve any part of the affirmative. If it does that, it's not reciprocal with any form of offense we're able to gain. But also it's a reason why there's also no reason why the alternative would be able to solve, because we have made a sequencing argument that the affirmative is a necessary precondition. It's a necessary precondition. Now we don't link to their arguments about going back to their Hooks evidence. We don't necessarily link to the Hooks evidence about material discussion. This is about a postmodern relationship to the world, about how we constantly are attempting to make constantly attempting to deconstruct meaning. Our argument is that meaning does not exist, but instead that people make it for themselves. That either there is a bodily location that we have in those structures, but that the material relationships we have to them need to be dissected and analyzed in the first place, which is what our use of evidence is about. We no place do we preclude governmental action, which means that the permutation is able to solve. Now permutation, do the alternative is an instantiation of the affirmation's death of reproduction. That solves all of their arguments, because it allows for us to examine the ways that specific material structures operate in the world, while affirming that the reason for or justification for those is based upon a demand for a reproductive body and self, which is constantly life denying. Our argument is additionally the argument from the Huja evidence that a demand for life, the demand for presencing in that life, is something that allows for us to constantly remake the idea of an environmental subject. We act upon the world as if we are not related to it, that our bodily relation is one that we can transpose to the world. Our argument is that they are right, that everything is an embodied structure, but that embodied structure is one that we should affirm we cannot know, which is the fragmentary nature of meaning that the use of evidence is talking about. This avoids the pitfalls of the liberal inclusion arguments that obviously links to from the 1AC, but is also a reason why the affirmative is a better strategy for engaging in those structures. They are far more symbolic than us. The alternative, which you should hold them to, is just to engage in pragmatic action. That is literally the most symbolic endorsement I've ever heard of this, which means that their arguments are simply the same refutation that they are criticizing. We are the only ones which are material. We're the only material analysis, which is what their framing is. Our argument is just that the ability for us to pretend to do simulated policies is one that does not effectuate change. The Colbrook evidence that I read above is fantastic on this. Says that we can question these ideas without necessarily destroying a concept of a polity. Instead, it is a mix which questions why and who we as a concept are.
First, can I just get all the permutations so you made?
Yeah, the first permutation I make is permutes Ben to you.
All right. So permutation due to F as a material instantiation of the death of reproduction.
Okay.
Permutation of firm. All right. Well, do you want them in order? Sorry, I was on the back of my flow. All right. Permutation, adopt pragmatic solutions, and the AF. There is a sociality net benefit argument after that. Then after that,
permutation to.
Yeah, so then it was permutation affirm the resolution as material. Then permutation do the AF as an instantiation of the death of reproduction. And then
sorry, I just forget what I say during the...
I think that was it.
Okay, so those are the only permutations.
I think I made 3, right? 3 to 4.
I was thinking CX for this. Is that?
I mean, these are just clarifications.
Okay. Okay. I was taking CX. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So. Yeah, sorry. Okay, yeah. So, okay. So my next question is, you say that your material, the 1AC is material. What part of the 1AC gives an action that will help people who are not in this space?
Well, we are material in the way that we.
You're a
analyze
material
material,
analysis, right?
which is all that we do in debate.
Okay, but
You're
what,
affirming a pragmatic action, which we say is a material analysis, is what you demand.
So, but like, what solution does it come up with? Like, you materially analyze what's wrong. What's wrong with
You'd say
climate
the
change?
affirmative is a precondition to discussing those form of solutions, but instead that the permutation will be able to.
Why can't you just
alleviate
do
it.
both?
We
Why
can't-
can't?
That's our argument.
That's our argument. We
No,
can't
but
do
why
both.
didn't you do it in the 1AC? Is my
both.
question.
Because we have made a sequencing claim that before we understand the policies about the topic that inevitably fail at the level of public engagement,
Okay.
because people don't want to change the way that their lives operate, we should question why we have the drive to constantly reproduce those ideas.
Sure.
We say that that's a precondition to governmental structure.
The tag of your USEF cards says that prescriptive solutions become the moving the deck chairs on the Titanic.
Yeah,
Why
absolutely.
isn't that true post-app?
Because absent a re-articulation of how coal is a social function, which is what the evidence is about. Our argument is that the specific prescriptive policy solutions in the status quo, absent the analysis of the AF, always simply fail at the level of public engagement. Our argument is not that they will always fail absent the affirmative. It is not like a nihilistic claim. It is instead that the affirmative is a necessary step for things like policies to occur.
Okay. So my next question is, what does for an action to be like? Can an action have good effects even if you don't have like the right educational model behind it? I.e., does like an action have to be driven by theory to be good?
You want me to answer that?
In the context of our affirmative, we would say our theory is the
Okay.
action restraint.
All right, so
Time, folks.
Yeah.
Sir Mary's restroom.
Yeah, go for it.
All right, stop it.
Alrighty.
Sending it out. 452.
452.
It's going to be the critique.
Right on. Anything just on the sheet proper, or is there any type of additional commentary?
I mean, there is like...
You got something to say.
Yeah,
Can
I
I put
got
that on a separate piece of paper?
No, not separate.
Okay.
It's just it's straight down.
That silence was great.
Not my first rodeo with either team here.
Line by line is arbitrary.
Fair point.
Everybody ready? This should be a question about the orientation towards the scholarship towards material change. Now, there is no material change within the 1AC because they are a theoretical relationship to coal. You have to explain to me how our theoretical relationship to coal will actually lead to the building of levies or the carbon tax that will actually change the material conditions that are happening within the status quo. Now, they try to say that they are already a material action, but now we are theoretical, but I don't think that there's anything theoretical about us saying that we have to remove the trucks from Newark or remove the violence that is happening in places like Bed-Stuy because of the way in which Katrina and Hurricane Sandy have ruined and destroyed these communities. Now, we say that our alternative is to debate about, is to have a deliberate discussion about how pragmatic action actually changes things. Now, we say that a topical version of the app, so to speak, would be that you could talk about how we should tax rich white people to rebuild the neighborhoods of people of color. Now, you talk about how we are theoretical symbolic action, but I think this leads hard into our Brian evidence, which talks about how we need to have these theoretical discussions about policy changes and material actions that cannot exist within the status quo, i.e. every time they talk about how the status quo will never actually resolve these issues, it's going to link harder into our Brian evidence, which talks about how when we talk about how political inaction happens, it leads to the politics of realism that stops us from actually creating political futures. We talk about the politics of the real in which we actually present these changes to the politics, i.e. when you look at things like Rutgers app, when they talk about how this lady actually went into these spaces and talked about how we should remove these trucks from Newark. This is sort of an impossible demand to the state, which led them to actually listen to the way in which she articulated her politics, which means that the negative is probably not beneficial to the affirmative. Now, my partner's going to get into the 5 permutation arguments that they made, but I'm going to do a little bit of link work here. The Brace evidence is going to be a damning argument to them in the world where they're talking about how we can't actually lead to political change and how our political action is caught up within the theory of the symbolic. No, these are the physical conditions that we actually live in. Sometimes we need to vote for Hillary in order to stop Donald Trump from becoming president. Now, we need to have these deliberate discussions. It was the 1AC's responsibility to present us with something that we can negate that, i.e. when they talk about how we should present them with pragmatic action, that's probably going to be a dissad to the way in which they have articulated their starting points. We say that this is a question about how you have started off the debate, which denies us of the possibility of having political discussions because all of your answers are just going to subsume the critique and talk about how you're a prerequisite. But at what point do we stop theorizing and start talking about the brown water in Flint, Michigan? Now, we need to have these political discussions, i.e. the bell hooks evidence, which they do not have a particularly great answer to, which talks about how these discursive spaces, i.e. debate, are key to creating liberation struggles. When they talk about how we need to have debate about the theory, no, debate is a space in which we can create pragmatic action. Everybody here already knows that the government is messed up, but it's what we do about the pragmatic physical conditions and material conditions conditions that we're actually experiencing. This means that the 1EC should have used their white privilege in order to talk about the political social movements that we could actually engage in, i.e. debate was a space where the LBS was birthed, which means that we can actually lead to political change within the community, i.e. debate becomes a space in which we can actually have these conversations. Every time that the 1EC gets up here and denies us of the possibility of having these conversations, it leads us back into the infinite regression of the theoretical relationship to the theoretical body of the theoretical asexual cold relationship. I don't understand what the affirmative does for the material conditions in which we exist, and now this is going to be reform is going to be the necessary key to resolve any of the impacts that happen because of the 1EC. This is Mizala intent. Reform work can be towards longer term transformative change. Meaning, I see that this change is incremental, but not then in all be all as far as change goes. Reform builds the capacity of people to fight in general, meaning that they can fight the system and generally believe that they can, even if it's not transforming the system. It's important that people believe in their capacity to fight. Reform exposes the nature of the system itself, causes people to ask about whether reform leads to transformation. This creates opportunities to develop consciousness around whatever kind of change you believe is transformative. Now you can cut the guard there. Now their last piece of use of evidence is going to be straight turned by this Mandela evidence, i.e. when they talk about how we are not going to be able to create these sorts of political actions without this theoretical engagement. We say that the prerequisite is the reform because that is what allows us to understand that we can challenge these systems of oppression. We can actually challenge the way in which politics is revealed to us and the way in which code is revealed to us through the actual political changes. Now we say that if material actions didn't actually happen, i.e. if the civil rights movement didn't actually happen, then there would be no way in which we can understand black people as equal and understand the way in which the system was messed up because we always understood the system as just being the system as that which was always going to be, and there was no escape from that sort of politics of realism. But when we actually stepped in and created political actions and political activism that actually changed the way in which politics was understood. Now we say that their politics of self-recognition, self-proclamation through the arts, through create a form of transformational empathy that sparks global movements to address environmental racism caused by climate change. This is season 15. This struggle in history has been written about by others, based in a large part of the voices of those active in the village. They cannot write us or relegate us to a way that we are still here. It is utterly foolish to think that just because they write laws because they want to that we don't exist. We still exist as foreground in the politics of self-recognition in highly specific political, legal, and cultural contexts that seek to write and regulate the community away deeply contested cultural and political context. Their fight dovetails with other communities fighting for their survival as a result is disrupted from climate change through the cultural politics of representation and recognition, alongside the long-term engagement, violent residents, and are able to push multiple political and cultural agendas. Now you can cut the guard there. Now. We say that these spaces, the education that we produce in these spaces is particularly key. I.e., when we talk about how political reform can be actually used to challenge the systems of oppression, that's probably going to be a net better form of education than talking about the theoretical conditions of way in which we experience cold, because those don't actually lead to pragmatic changes. They just deny the possibility of pragmatic action. Now they talk about how they are material conditions and how there is no link, but I think that the Bryan evidence is going to wash away that link analysis. I.e., in the world where they're not talking about how they're not talking about the material policy actions that come from the 1EC. They can't get access to their material analysis. They're a theoretical analysis of what happens in the material, not a material analysis of what happens in the theoretical, which means that the negative becomes a prerequisite to the affirmative, and the affirmative also says that literally the only argument that they make here is that there's no link to the affirmative, but we've proven substantially that if you do not have a conversation about what we can actually do to engage with in the political system, then you can't actually create any sorts of change that you're talking about the 1EC. There's no spillover claim from the 1EC about how their education gets exported into the political realm, i.e. that means that they don't have any access to the sorts of reforms that happen within the political realm. That means that you prefer the negative as a net better way in which we can create social movements movements, i.e., like the LBS, that actually creates political reforms. Now they say that the Bryan evidence is a critique, that they are the critique of the political that the Bryan evidence is talking about. But I think that they are still trapped within this political realism, i.e., when their use of evidence talks about how the government is how the government and tangential reform actions are not valuable within the status quo. Bryan is indicting the idea that we can see any sorts of reform as not valuable, because every sort of reform allows us to change the way in which politics operates on certain bodies and the way in which politics perceives certain bodies. So we are prerequisite to the way in which politics values those bodies, i.e., the government will always exist after affirmative, but we have to continue to challenge the notion that we are not valuable within the status quo by creating sorts of material actions and creating demands upon the state that will change the way in which we engage with the state. Now, we say that this legal education is going to be particularly key in the context of disability. This Cantor 11. Disability studies infuses into the legal academy as a perspective of those who are routinely made invisible, marginalized. Disability studies helps us to see disability as part of the human experience and to understand how the law and society in general views difference as a deviation when the issues involve race. Blacks are considered a deviation when the issue is disability to able-bodied.
Okay.
Cross-examination?
Yes. What is an impossible demand?
Well, we're not saying it. Wait, what do you mean?
Your Bryant evidence, your Bryant evidence seems to say that we need to make impossible demands. That
we need to make demands upon the state that will change the way in which the state views us as valuable. I.e., the quote-unquote impossible demand is not like the impossible demand that Wilderson's talking about. It's an impossible demand. Yeah. It's an impossible demand that it cannot happen within the status quo. I.e., when you talk about how we can't have these sorts of small reforms because of the way we view coal, that's the sort of demand that we have to make in order to change the politics.
Understood. So it seems that the piece of evidence it seems that your Bryant evidence, which is talking about forms of political realism, uses the example of the civil rights movement, as you talked about, that needed things like not caring about political backlash or the sort of relevant the people who would be angered, right? Like actually creating forms of progressive politics outside of what we consider to be a real idea. I guess, how does the affirmative sort of wrestling with the idea of why people are so embedded in fossil fuels is not.
Well, it's not a political demand, is what we're saying. You're saying that politics is irreparable because of our relationship to coal. What we're saying is that politics is a prerequisite to changing our relationship to coal. I.e., if you went to a Congress meeting and you said that coal is bad, we have all of these alternative forms of energy, and you kept doing that over and over again, and you kept on making those demands, and you kept on getting larger and larger movements to make those demands, that is what changes the policy towards coal.
Well, that seems to be the incrementalism that your Bryant evidence is talking about. What? So it seems to be what your Bryant evidence is talking about, incremental examples of reform that would simply change the way we relate to coal.
I guess I'm not understanding what the
my
reform
question is, how does the AF's questioning of why we are so indebted to coal and always, whenever we create policies around it, simply move around?
I guess the argument is that
why is that not an impossible demand?
Well, I guess the argument is that the 1AC is not a demand.
Ideas.
The argument is that the 1AC is not a demand. The 1AC is a stance. The 1AC is a stance with no action that says, hey, we have a bad relationship to coal, we should have some sort of asexual relationship. I don't know how that's political in any way. I don't know how that's pragmatic in any way. We say that political literally means to engage with political systems, i.e. voting for Hillary so that Trump doesn't get elected.
So what does your alternative do as an instantiation of the political?
I mean, we say that you rob us of that conversation, and the fact that you're asking us that proves that your 1AC is probably bad because you're not using your privilege to create political demands. But secondly, we offer political demands such as taxing white rich people so that we can rebuild communities like Bed-Stuy and
if that was a counterplan against the AF, would it be competitive?
If that was a counterplan against the AF?
Yes, if that was a counterplan, would it be competitive?
What would the net,
We're saying the thesis of the 1AC is problematic and that this would have been a better thesis for the 1AC. Like, it's not we said that it's not the negative's job to present a pragmatic action because then it wouldn't be competitive and we wouldn't be able to debate, and that would mean that you robbed us of the opportunity to talk about pragmatism.
Alright, simple one. It's gonna be just on the permutations.
Okay, 1 second, TJ.
Okay. I can shorten the stand anyway because everyone in this room is much taller than I am.
Just like here.
Yeah.
Is that good?
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. Thank you.
All right, TJ.
Everyone good?
Ready when you are.
First argument gets a permutation and severance. They do not provide material action. The 1AC, a material analysis is not the same as an action, i.e. they don't say how do we help the people in Myanmar, how do we help the people in Flint, Michigan. That is not part of the 1AC, and there's no way you're going to actually give them access to that. That is their form of debate allows for them to be nebulous and hypothetical in the 1AC and then shift when convenient, i.e. when we bring up Prague, they were always already Prague. That is the form of debate that keeps us out and prevents us from actually having conversations because they're just ballot focused. They just want you to vote for them, OG. They don't care what happens to the people in Flint, Michigan. That is the conceded bell hooks evidence that talks about how white people always skirt conversations away from people of color too, and how their radical queer theory and their radical talks of discursive power ignore the fact that black people are actually dying in the status quo, which is why they're bad for a debate, and you shouldn't give them access to permutation because it makes it impossible for us to be negative and actually talk about pragmatic change. Their 1AC should have actually given a solution that we could debate, and their permutation linked to their own symbolic argument. Listen to all their permutations. Do the F as a material action. Perm do adapt pragmatic solutions. Perm affirm the resolution as material. Perm embrace the death of reproduction. All of those are symbolic actions that just give lip service to the idea that we can help these people. They don't actually say what is the government going to do. What is that pragmatic action? We're saying that their 1AC should have been, they should have done research about how do we actually help these communities get a policy discussion so that we can debate it that way, that when we leave this space we can talk about it. That's our Spencer evidence that they conceded from the 1AC that says that legal education is key and that people have access to legal education, i.e. people in debate who are probably going to be future lawyers and future politicians should bring that knowledge outwards because communities don't have access to this knowledge. They don't have access to our books. They don't have access to law work, so we have an obligation to teach them, which means we need to have these conversations, one, in these spaces, but also because Jason is someone who's an engineer. Jason doesn't always get access to his legal education, which means this is the space where he can get access to it, and they rob him of that, which is why their permutation is never going to function, because it should happen in the 1AC, and they're wrong about the prerequisite argument. That's the Elevels argument that they conceded. Elevels is saying that black disabled people are constantly put in the position of destitution because of their material reality. Ask yourself, why did Anderson Cooper say that New Orleans wasn't America? Did he say it because he was obsessed with coal, or did he say it because the place looked shitty? That's the question. Materiality comes first. Material conditions we exist in shape our reality, i.e. black people not being allowed to get on buses or enter public theaters created the reality of separation and created the reality that blacks and whites were not equal, which means changing the reality is key to changing our social theories and the way we relate to the world, which means we're the prerequisite. Our evidence is much better on this question. Both the Arabels and the Bryan Evans get to this question better and give specific warrants and examples of how this occurs. Now, their theory demonizes people with actual asthma, i.e. the way that they call about coal and black lungs is theoretical, while ignoring the people in Brooklyn that actually have these conditions. That's the academic argument that means the perm is not justifiable, and there's a psych violence impact that they're not going to resolve. That's our brace evidence. It's the question of these people disabled people who require the state to exist, who live in this space have psychological violence because they hate the state, but they need to rely on it. They're just abstract conversation about the death drive and about how the world is screwed and how the government is never going to work and how that we're moving the chairs on a Titanic. It fuels the psychological violence of the people who have to rely on that system that is creating that violence for existence, which means that they are just a form of victim blaming for the disabled people that need medication, or they're going to die. Also, there is an internalized ableism, a reason to reject the for affirmation. Their call for rejection of the body, i.e. their evidence that says that we shouldn't be the anthropocentric human, we shouldn't see our bodies, we should be the inhuman. That is our Siebert evidence that they don't fundamentally answer. Siebert specifically talking about we need to understand the nuances of when a deaf woman walks into the room, how does her social environment change? They abstract and create a universalized body, but not every body has two legs. Not everybody can hear. We need to understand those nuances, and that's why materiality is important, because your social circumstances, it changes if you're in a wheelchair and the building doesn't have elevators. So that is why a material focus comes first solve the suppression. They create this again, they recreate psychological violence because they force a compulsory able body in order to access their theories. Internalized ableism mean in order to attain the benefit of disability identity, one must constantly participate in the process of disability disavowal, aspiring towards normativity. Passing occurs when there's a perceived danger and disclosure. It represents a form of self-protection. Nevertheless, usually disabled to sometimes destroy the self. It means safeguard ableism. Ableist passing is not just the individual who hiding their disability. Ableism involves failure to ask about difference for internalized ableism. It occurs that there needs to be a priori presumption of compulsory ableism, such as self-passing keep the colonizer happy by not disturbing the peace. Mark the card at peace, and so the permutation is just going to act as this accommodation, this way that they can just shift out of the 1AC. You have to ask yourself in a gut check way, was the 1AC pragmatic? What part of the 1AC gave a material action to help the people in Myanmar? Our argument is our GPD evidence that goes conceded, our LS goes conceded. It says that it's the material conditions that shape people's social construct, i.e. the reason people couldn't get out of Myanmar was because the social structure already existed, made it so disabled people were left to die when the storm happened. I got 8.
Yeah, your time went out. I wrote it down, folks. Affirmative has 637.
Oh, 252 left.
Yep.
Go ahead and write that down just real quick. What is it, 151?
252.
252. Very good, thank you. Get set up, buddy. Make sure you're in the camera. All that.
Yep.
Could you just pass my pen? Yeah. I don't want to draw that pen. I didn't write anything.
We're just going to be case and then the K.
Just tell VM, get ready to judge a 1AR. Stop texting me. Judging. Alright.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, now I got case, and I have, of course, the K is, you said, is after. Is there any particular starting point for the conversation?
It's gonna be like small overview on the K, pretty
Okay.
quick, and then just line by line straight down from 2 NC to 1 NR.
Oh, okay. Okay, very good. Just actually no, I should be at that bottom space here on the sheet. I should be alright. Okay, buddy, when you're ready.
All right.
We affirm the death of reproduction through the affirmation that they planted as asexual. They've conceded that we don't trade off with our embodied form of politics, i.e. that we but we have also conceded a liberal demarcation to set on case, i.e. that making oneself known via the symbolic is a form of demarcation that overcodes particular bodies such that they're forced to disclose their disability, which turns their net benefit on their permutation argument top of the K. No articulation whether one AC surrounds material structures, the instantiation of carbon and first desire is literally material in the sense that carbon, the food that we eat, the non-human cells that make up our human bodies, the plastic character mountaintop removals are all material influences our subjectivity and ability to relate to the world, and politics writ large such that populations, such that solutions such as carbon taxes and levy billing are always deferred in favor of considerations that are deemed pragmatic, such as fracking because it's economically efficient or increases GDP, or highway construction to improve the flow of commerce. The question of debate is not about pragmatism, yes, no, but rather a question of whether the African conjunction with alternative leads to a more desirable form of pragmatism than the status quo, because obviously the status quo is insufficient. The 1NC top of the flow, 1NC top of the flow, 1NC positive field theory for why pragmatic action is desirable in the same sense that the 1AC also positive why pragmatic action is desirable. Thus we meet their interpretation that orientation towards scholarship should be towards material change debating solely how pragmatic action affects the world, ignores how the world is constructed. The litmus test for whether or not discussion attacking white people is precluded by the affirmative, whether or not reading is a counterplan would be campaign. If one permutation do both solves that the Kim Gaddy reference, they mix the Rutgers is also precluded. We didn't say engage in EIS community surveys is a broad process articulating physical conditions via language is also fundamentally symbolic, which answers their voting arguments about why it should be about discussing the impacts of physical policies, because that discussion is in effect a symbolic discussion as to the method of how we implement policies and whether or not they're desirable, in the same way that the AF has discussed the way in which the material structures policies. Yes, we do vote not for Trump at the point where we start talking about the brown water. Additionally, at what point do we start talking about the brown water in Michigan? And this is the reason for why the 1AC discussed the disparate impact of coal on non-white communities in Bangladesh and the thousands of deaths attributed to fracking in the United States, and surrender white privilege that we can engage in presumes that whiteness as a structure hasn't legitimized the material structures that are in place in the status quo of carbon that oppress black and brown bodies. We have if we have polluted rivers, disadvantaged communities, and bad and an overall horrible state of the environment, then what does it say about our current state of environmental law that it lacks a direction towards the material that's informed by a disavowal of reproduction? The Manzala evidence that they read says incremental form is good, which links to their critique of political realism that they read in their Bryant's evidence, in which their evidence literally says that incrementalism never erases the racist policy of the past, and their transformational empathy argument then they make with the Sioux evidence they read about self-recognition presumes that empathetic identification is beneficial for disabled bodies, which links to our fragmentary meaning dissent because it overcodes disability and attempts to make it intelligible to the current political status quo in a way that forces bodies to be productive. Normacy is Brian analysis about not talking about material policy actions supposes that we're always talking about material policy actions that are necessarily good, but there's no prerequisite for solvency argument that they're making because they endorse a pragmatism sans theorizing analyzing why their certain policy options are good. Absent the aft, their carbon taxes are upstreamed and aggressively placed on poor communities that have no choice but to rely on fossil fuels. Their levies are funded from poor taxes that are pushed by elites that want to reproduce their values. Yet the government, yes, the government will always exist, but our entire app is about making it effective because we can all agree that the status quo is ineffective, so endorsing a pragmatic praxis towards it is not necessarily good. They drop the Colbert dissent argument that indicates that self-recognition can be dangerous because it produces a situation where the I either become a subject by demanding inclusion to the state or refuse recognition. Our argument is that this binary, in Claire Colbert's words, quote, does away with the very concept of the political by dictating what is or isn't political enough or should be included for consideration the state, which is antithetical to their alternative pragmatism because it requires that our perspective is excluded from the realm of being politically possible in the first place, which is the definition of which is the antithesis of pragmatism, because it means that there's no way in which we can incorporate political demands. The permutation arguments that they make extend permutation to the affirmative as a pragmatic instance of action. It still endorses pragmatism while acknowledging that the one ECS values the app as an instance of pragmatic solution, affirming the death of reproduction is part and parcel with reducing the demand of the body for the body to be productive in normative ways that craft survival as the ability for one to escape natural disasters based upon an ableist norm of self-embodiment or the ability to consume or accumulate profit in ways that disadvantages the communities. There are evidence sites and studies that have resulted in deaths in Bangladesh vis-a-vis things like the rapid reduction of coal. Permutation due to the F as a material instantiation of the death of reproduction also solves because it takes into account the material praxis of the alternative, but yet includes 100% of the affirmative. None of these permutations are severance because they include the entirety of the F. There's no flagging why each permutation is severance, which means you should allow them to sandbag us in the 2 and R with new articulation. Severance is not a vote or a reason for why we shifted advocacy. Also keep in mind that I'm contextualizing all of the 1AR permutations to why they solve individual arguments, whereas the 1NR more or less just groups them, which was why you shouldn't allow any new 2NR re-articulation because it sandbags for the same reason that they say that severance is bad, which is conceded internally to argue or to impact argument permutation from the resolution is material. They've conceded that we are resolutional and we don't preclude policy. Affirming it as a material instantiation of action solves all their arguments because it means that we can still relate to it. I'll answer the permutation dissents, the idea that we don't care about people in Flint, Michigan, or the thousands of people who died in India due to are cited in our coal 1EC or the studies of mountaintop removal casualties, and the use of evidence is a mischaracterization of the app because they believes that we aren't here to produce solutions but rather just to create balance. Yes, we don't say that what the government should do, because if the government did what we asked them, then we wouldn't have a situation in which disabled bodies are being left behind in natural disaster where there are massively polluted rivers, or where Anderson Cooper is saying that New Orleans wasn't America. We don't refuse the idea that legal education is bad, which is why the entire debate is over is how to improve legal education, which is not why it's not an opportunity cost and the permutations capable of solving. It's not. Additionally, we solve their change of reality by changing social theory's argument, because the entire app says that coal is a social institution that influences how individuals engage policy. We don't ignore ASMO. Rather, we have said that coal is a necropolitical institution that produces conditions by which disabled people have to live next to things like coal plants, etc. Additionally, we didn't say anything about the death drive, nor are we denying the medication to disabled people. Rather, critique the situation in which individuals feel as if they have to depend on coal, feel what systematically blackens their lungs and disables their body, yet they're dependent on the same way in which they're dependent upon the state. Our argument is that this relationship between violence and dependency must be analyzed. We don't disavow disability use of passing, which is why Joe disclosed his disability in the 2AC.
Silver. 452.
Yeah. All right, buddy.
Yep,
Tell me where we're starting.
So it's just a critique. Straight down. Yep.
Okay.
All right.
Very good. You're ready, senor.
Everybody ready? This considered this is a question about which scholarship is best for analyzing how material action can actually change the way in which we think about the way in which you think about these communities. Now, they have argued that they are material analysis, but they are not a material action, which is the argument that the one in our made that it goes coal conceded. We need to talk about the actual pragmatic solutions that actually change the way in which we relate to coal. Now, the Arabella evidence is going to be damning to all of their analysis because it talks about how the material conditions actually structure the way in which we are viewed within the status quo, i.e., we're not talking about how coal affects the material conditions, but we're talking about how the material conditions affect the way in which we value the bodies in those spaces, i.e., people will always be seen as third world citizens because they live in third world conditions, but we need to change and challenge those conditions. Now, they have no insight of why pragmatic action will probably be bad, which means that you prefer the negative as a prerequisite to the affirmative. If there's no reason why pragmatic action is bad, then that means that we can do the affirmative after we do the negative pragmatic action because people are literally dying in the status quo, and the affirmative necessarily trades off with that conversation. That's the Hooks evidence, which talks about how when we always talk about the theoretical, we always talk about how coal creates this asexual relationship to the asexual being of the asexual body. We don't actually talk about how the people are actually dying from Flint, Michigan water. Now, they say that there are already analysis of how the material conditions action, but we can literally be a view from nowhere and talk about how we see all of these people dying and look at people getting shot and people getting asthma and people getting heart attacks, but never actually do anything about it because they've created debate spaces an academic space in which we always theorize and always get to the theoretical and always move towards the theoretical of the political, but we never actually change the political. That's the spiritual evidence which goes cold conceded by the one of the other talks about how we need to use these spaces. We are obligated to use these spaces to create material change of political education and legal education that leads into the communities. They have no spillover claims, which means that you give us 100% of our solvency on the negative strategy because we're talking about how the political is actually the debate space. We actually have political power within each debate space because we create movements like LBS and we create movements that lead into academia and then lead into the political. They have no insight of this transition, which means that you prefer our alternative solvency is 100% not answered by the affirmative. Now, their only argument here is that they made 5 permutation arguments and they contextualize them in different ways, but in the world in which your permutation arguments are just perm do the app, perm do the app, perm do the app, perm do the app, it doesn't actually change anything about the pragmatic conditions in which we are living. And just talking about how we need to talk about the theoretical aspect of coal before we talk about pragmatic solutions, but there's no insight of the way in which we create material changes and material changes to lead to political. Now, they say that we're linking to our own Brian Evans, but Brian is talking about how when we create political demands upon the state, we actually change the way in which we engage with the civil society. So that means that they have not literally answered the thesis of the Brian Evans, which says we need to have a politics of realism that leads us back into the political actions that we can actually value these bodies, i.e., the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement led into the value being brought back into black bodies and led people away from Jim Crow. It might not be a perfect solution, but it's net better than being lynched every single day. Now, we're talking about how people are literally dying from Flint, Michigan, so we should probably provide solutions that tax rich white people who have caused the leaks and oil spills that led to the brown water and lead that back to giving water to those communities, because every day we talk about Flint, Michigan, it just gets lesser and lesser in the news because we never have these political conversations in places like the Bay where we can actually create political change. Now, their non-answers to the Spencer evidence is probably going to be damning to the way in which their affirmative operates because they have no insight of the way in which the debate space can be used to create political change, which means that we're not better than the affirmative, and you can even vote that the affirmative makes the status quo net worse because they make debate a space of theorization and debate a space of non-pragmatic action, which means that they've robbed us of the conversation, which is the Hooks evidence. I don't think they have a particularly good answer to this piece of evidence, which talks about how when we theorize about the debate space, we actually push out black lives, we actually push out the way in which black people experience violence every single day. Because we never actually talk about that. We always want to move to the theoretical. We say that you should use your white privilege to create a pragmatic solution within the 1AC and allow us to have these conversations instead of talking about how you're a prerequisite to literal death of black people. How are you a prerequisite to people dying in Flint, Michigan? How are you a prerequisite to people having asthma attacks in Newark? How are you a prerequisite to people literally dying from Hurricane Katrina? Still to this day, after like 8 years of people of political quote-unquote reform that has never actually happened. Now they say that political reform is never going to be good, but they have not proven an instance in which all political reforms are bad. The reason why we don't have political reforms is because we never actually talk about the political changes that can actually happen. We always, the people who are woke, the people who are in the debate community, and the people who have the opportunity to change the way in which you talk about the political system, always talk about it amongst each other, but never talk about it amongst the political system itself. So we need to move these theories outside of this debate space instead of talking about how these theories need to exist within the debate. We already know that the government is messed up. We already know that our relationship to coal is bad. How many times do you have to read your app before we actually create pragmatic solutions that lead into social movements from the debate community? Now, this spillover claim is probably going to resolve all of the impacts of the affirmative, talking about how coal is how our relationship to coal theoretically creates this monarchical heteronormative government, because we're talking about how the material conditions actually change the theoretical conditions. It doesn't even matter if we don't change the theoretical conditions, if we actually change the material violence that happens on the daily in the status quo, because we're talking about the actions that happen, because the theoretical, even if the government hates us, we still can't be drinking brown water in Flint, Michigan. Even if the government hates us, we still can't be surviving off of scraps and having our homes flooded because of Hurricane Sandy. I literally have friends who don't have homes because the government has not done anything to solve it. Vote neg.
All right.
212.
Okay.
212.
Man, 252.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
252. That's right, Zach.
I was gonna say I've been really off prep that.
No, yeah.
It's not like a floating thing of old songs that have there's no advantages. There's no net benefit to sequencing your shit except for like a time frame. Why not get both at the same time? Use the next theory for political action. Do both simultaneously. It's not like we take a long time thinking about how to material action. Do material action. Is that
What school, what year in school you go to?
Binghamton.
I know, but what year?
Oh, junior.
3 years now.
Yeah.
Judging with
I'm
California.
trying to think if you're a senior. Mr. Smith, you're a senior, actually.
Yeah.
And you guys are juniors, right?
I'm a senior, but I'll taking a 5th year next year.
You're from Arizona, right?
But I do have the boyish charm of a junior. So.
Ah, yes, most certainly. And where are you from, buddy?
Des Moines, Iowa.
That's right. I knew that.
Dowling,
Dowling, right?
Yep.
Okay. Does Valley still debate?
Yep. One of the people on our debate team, Sam, his father coaches them.
I knew that.
Yep.
I knew that. Right on. Okay, buddy, where are we headed?
It's just the K. Starting with the permutations. Okay.
Oh, starting with the perm?
Yeah. Okay. Is everyone ready? Okay. There's no argument for legal education is transformative, insofar as the F is not permutation. Affirm the resolution material. The question of this debate is not pragmatism. Yes, no. It's a question of whether or not the F in conjunction with the alternative leads to a more desirable form of pragmatism than the status quo. This instantiation of carboniferous desire is literally material, and since the carbon, the food that we eat, the non-human cells that make up our human bodies, the plastic ground for mountaintop removal, all materially influence our subjectivity and the ability to relate to the world and politics writ large. Such solutions such as carbon tax and levies are always deferred in favor of considerations. They've conceded a couple of arguments as to why this should be framed as a permutation debate, and all their flooding pig arguments are the alternative would be able to resolve the effort. Literally just permutations. One is that they've conceded that there is solutions that they've implemented resulted upstream taxes, gentrification, and more forms of water pollution. It has been taxing the rich because the white people can just exempt themselves from those structures. But absent a re-articulation, we will concede the argument that debate is a political space because that gives us a spillover argument. But additionally, they've conceded the argument that there is no. They've conceded the argument that we're a prerequisite absent the analysis of our use-off evidence. Absent the analysis of our use-off evidence, there is not an answer in the 2NR to. There is not an answer in the 2NR to the ability for us to combine these examples. The next permutation argument that solves the effort that solves the entire of this case is the permutation to the affirmative is a pragmatic instance of action, which is what their alternative engages in, which is what the alternative engages in. It still endures pragmatism while acknowledging that the 1AT has value. The 1AT is an instance of a pragmatic solution, i.e. affirming the death of that reproduction is part and parcel of while refusing the demand for the body to be productive in normative ways that craft survival is the ability for one to escape natural disaster or the ability to consume and accumulate profit. They have conceded an error replication to their alternative, i.e. that absent a world where we actually question the reproductive assumptions about the world, they inevitably get destroyed, which was Ben's arguments from the 1AR. That they Ben's arguments from the 1AR, which is you should frame this through an offense and defense paradigm, whereas we have a large amount of offense against their alternative, while their offense against the permutation is not really explained in the 2NR, which means that you should hold the high line on any of the arguments that they make. They are the high line on any of the arguments that they make that you should extend our use of evidence to dissect your own desires. No actual defense of those terms means that their scholarship is the form of endless theorizing, not ours. We can still conform with all their arguments. They have framed at the end of the 2NR, he says that they have said that all political reforms are bad, but there are still some that are good. We have never said that all political reforms are bad. Our argument is instead that there are necessary preconditions for our ability to engage in things like the discussions of energy production, i.e. specifically the use of evidence, which says that a precondition for our ability to engage in the structures of politics is to understand our relationship to it. They've also conceded the disadvantage to their alternative, disadvantage to the alternative that the permutation is able to resolve the self-recognition DA of the Colbert evidence read in the 2AC, which says that the ability, something that there is an inside and outside of politics means that we deem certain things as political and certain things as not political, wherein we can do things like affirm one's relationship to structures of psychoanalytic structures while also engaging in political relationality, which is the reason why we turn to link to things like their Bryant evidence, because we are the ones that are the impossible demand upon the state. Our argument is that if we can really combine the pragmatic action of the affirmative with their engagement with our engagement with structure, this is able to solve. Now, additionally, the permutation you should extend the third permutation to do the F as the material instantiation of the death of reproduction, which is their alternative. Is the material example is to advocate for a pragmatic material solution, which means that this permutation is able to solve because it takes into account the material praxis of their alternative, but includes 100% of the F. There isn't any defense to it. These are three specific permutations that Ben has extended that I have made in the 2AC, which are distinct specific arguments. They have made. The censor evidence says that we need to create material structures. This is the argument that this is just as incrementalism is good, which turns their incrementalism bad, or which turns their incrementalism bad argument. Now, the material instantiation of the death of reproduction is able to resolve all of their arguments because it's able to resolve all their arguments because they simply are making the claim that we do not engage in material structures. The scholarship argument that they have said about which scholarship is better, the permutation is one, able to resolve this, but two, our scholarship is good because it creates a ability for us to engage in politics. We are always making a prerequisite argument from the want to see that we are a prerequisite to the alternative, which means that you should frame all of their alternative comes first arguments through a lens of how we engage in these things. The stops there are, you should think about it like this: the material instantiation of the death of reproduction can be something like a carbon tax on white folks, but stops the reproduction of gentrification which occurs. This is literally the argument that Ben is making in the 1AR of an error replication thing that happens absent the affirmative engagement, which means that you should frame this as a time frame permutation. They should frame their alternative as just a time frame permutation for us, because there is no relative defense against the permutation's ability to operate. They say that we create debate as an endless theorizing structure. Our argument is instead that we need to theorize about the material instantiations before we engage in those ideas. There is not a time differential between what the negative does to instantiate change and what we do to instantiate change. It means the permutation is able to resolve that argument. They are not a prerequisite. They are not a prerequisite, or the reason why they are not a prerequisite to any of our arguments, because they have conceded that both the world is structured by an idea of reproduction, but also that they have not provided a unique benefit of why their legal education is somehow better, and have not given a reason why their specific example of legal education is able to actually change structures, like the impossible demand that their Bryant evidence uses. We are the example of the realer than real structure that their arguments are able to do. Their white privilege legalism argument, empirically using white privilege to make decisions, has not been a good idea. That was in the 1AR. It's resulted in pragmatic policies like Plessy v. Ferguson or school segregation, Iran Contra crisis. The objection that we can't theorize now because people are dying obscures the necessity of theorizing such that the policies don't disenfranchise body. They conceded we were talking about the material, and if talking about the material isn't changing the material, then they are also literally just talking about how to change the material structures, but not changing for them. If they're changing them, the warrants why are also warrants for why the affirmative does this. At the end of this debate, you should write your ballot like this. The permutation, I think the one of the three permutations solves all of their offense, because they have conceded an argument that the affirmative is a prerequisite for our ability to theorize. This is what your ballot should say at the end of the debate. It also at the top of the stage said, I vote F.
Alrighty, folks. Thank you. Listen, I can't do any post round with you all, but I'll see you tonight after the award ceremony. Yeah. Right now, what you should do, however, is go downstairs and get some breakfast smoothies and snacks, because you have exactly about 11-12 minutes before that next round starts. So go ahead and take a break, get yourself comfortable, and I will see you tonight at 7 o'clock for the award ceremony.
Can we post around you at the Mooka if we feel the need?
What's that, TJ?
Can we post around you at the Mooka?
Yes, you can. Absolutely, positively. I have many a crew that wants to post around me this evening, TJ. So we're gonna get together. We're gonna eat some dessert, and we're gonna chat. But for right now, go ahead and get some desserts, some vittles, and good luck in round 6, everybody. Hey, Coach, how are you?
Doing better now.
Good. Glad to hear that. Feeling a little under the weather? Sounds